Hello, welcome to Airport Familiarization and Drivers Training. I'm Cameron Halleck, the Deputy Director of Whitman Regional Airport, and today's training is to get you guys and gals familiar with the airport, any updates we have from last year, procedures we use, and get you ready for operating around aircraft during AirVenture. This not only is a safety training to make sure everybody stays separated and controlled out on the airfield, it's also an FAA requirement. This has to be done for the airliners that come in during AirVenture. So this meets those requirements and hopefully enhances safety for everybody out here on the airfield. Specifically, we'll be covering several topics that the FAA requires, including going over our airfield diagram, discussing all of the important pieces of pavement, runways, major taxiways, and then we'll go into airport-specific procedures, rules, and regulations that everybody has to follow. Let's start with some definitions and terms to help us all communicate on the same page when talking aviation. The first term is apron or ramp, and those terms are interchangeable. It essentially just means a parking lot where airplanes park. So an example of that would be the large concrete pad that's just outside the new general aviation terminal where airplanes park. That would be considered an apron. Air traffic control tower is located on the west side of the fields in the EAA grounds and is owned by the county but operated by an FAA contractor. They're the controllers who would be talking to you while you move around the airport. Their view is set up so that they can see all the important pieces of pavement while you move around. Next, emergency equipment personnel. That's just what we call first responders. Pretty obvious on that one. A hotspot is an area identified on the airport where there's a potential risk of collision or runway incursion, entering a runway without permission. And so these areas, only one at our airport, are highlighted on the airport diagram, and we'll look at that a little bit later. But it's just an area on the airport that we need to use extra vigilance when driving around because there might be confusing intersections or something like that. The movement area is the pieces of pavement, runways, taxiways that are controlled by the tower. And so in order to move around in a vehicle or an airplane or on foot in these areas, we have to have permission from the control tower. The non-movement area is made up of taxi lanes and aprons or ramps that are not under the control of the tower. So when you're driving around the non-movement area, no radio communication is required. However, you're responsible for giving way to all aircraft. Runways. Of course, runways are the surfaces that aircraft use to take off and land. We have a little bit more information on runways for you here. They're named based on the 360-degree compass system. So for example, runway 1836 is a compass heading of 180 degrees or south in one direction, and then the other direction would be the opposite, or 360 degrees directly north. So runways, their labels can actually tell you which orientation or which direction they're facing. All runways have surface markings that are white. Runway surface markings include centerline stripes, edge stripes, threshold touchdown bars, and runway designation markings. All of this paint is white. And that's key because we don't use white paint in other areas of the airport. It's really designated just for runways. Runway edge lighting is white as well, and it changes color the last 2,000 feet, turns yellow or amber to show aircraft that they're approaching the end of the runway at night. We do have 4 runways. The one we talked about, runway 1836, is considered our primary runway. It has equipment on it that allows pilots to land in the lowest visibility and cloud heights at our airport, so that is a very important runway. And of course, almost equally as important, runway 927 and the 2 diagonals serve the smaller aircraft and important as well on days where the wind favors those runways. Pilots always want to take off or land into the wind. It helps them get off the ground quicker and climb at a steeper angle. And then landing, it allows them to land at the slowest possible speed. Taxiways are designed to get aircraft to and from the runways for takeoff or landing. They're painted differently than runways to help you identify what you're on. Taxiways, we use yellow markings, and as a reminder, runways was white markings. Taxiway surface markings, they'll include a yellow center line, and in some parts of the airport, they'll have double yellow edge lines. Taxiways have blue edge lights or reflectors, as opposed to white lights on a runway. Again, this is important to help you identify that you're on a taxiway and not a runway, or vice versa. Airfield signs are important. Their colors and, of course, what's on them means something, so we'll get into more of that in the next few slides. The most important sign to be aware of on our airfield are mandatory instruction signs. They're essentially stop signs, except you have to stop and wait till you have permission. They identify the runways, and the runways are the most protected pieces of pavement. That's where the high-speed operations occur for aircraft, and so this sign is very important. At every intersection, taxiway intersection to a runway, we'll have one of these signs located there. So getting around the airport when you're not out here every day can be a challenge, and same goes for pilots who aren't familiar with the airport. So the US and across the world has standardized signage to help you get around. So think of these signs as your street signs, and when comparing these to a map you might have in your lap, that's how you'll navigate around the airfield. So the first sign we'll talk about is a location sign. It's a sign that's got yellow lettering and a black background. And being a location sign, it's telling you where your location is right now. What taxiway am I on? In this case, we're on taxiway Bravo. To help you remember, yellow on black, where you are at. Direction signs are the opposite color scheme, so yellow background, black lettering, and they come with an arrow. So these are called direction signs, and they show you what piece of pavement you're coming up to. And if you turn the direction of the arrow, you'll then be on that piece of pavement. So in this case, we're on taxiway Bravo, and this perpendicular piece of pavement here is Bravo 1. So if we were to turn left, we would be on Bravo 1. You could then look at your map and confirm your location. Next, we'll talk about the surface markings you'll see out here on the airport, the paint on the ground. This first one, the first photo we're looking at here is the movement, non-movement area boundary. It's a single solid yellow line next to a single dashed line. And this is the line that tells you where you need to call to get permission to enter the movement area. So you'd be on a ramp next to where airplanes are parked. You approach a taxiway, you see this line, that means I need to stop before I cross it and get permission to go out onto the movement area. So in this case, the ramp is on the left side and the taxiway is on the right side, or in other words, the non-movement area is over here and then movement area over here. The solid yellow line is, think of it like a stop bar painted at a stop sign on the streets. Basically, if you're approaching it from the solid side, it's a reminder for you to stop and get permission. If you're exiting the movement area when you're done with your work, going back to the non-movement area, in that case you approach the dashed side of this line first, and that means you can cross through without permission because you're leaving the movement area. So the important thing to remember here is if you approach one of these painted markings from the solid side, you need to stop and get permission. Permission comes for us here at the airport. We use aviation radios, and we would call them on this frequency. In OFD's case, you would be communicating over your fire radios on the airport channel. Our controllers are trained and have radios up there to talk to you and give you permission to enter the movement area on that radio. Hold short lines. So this is kind of the big brother of the previous marking. This identifies where you need to hold short of runways and gain permission to enter that runway. So 2 solid yellow lines and 2 yellow dashed lines make up this. And similar to the movement, non-movement area boundary line, if you're approaching on the solid side, so you're coming up to what I like to call the stop bar, that means you're about to enter a runway and you need to stop and get permission. When you exit the runway, you approach the dashed lines, and that means you can cross and you don't need to get permission onto a runway because you're leaving the runway. So we've looked at the hold short markings and the mandatory instruction signs independently. Here's what they look like together. So every taxiway that enters onto one of our runways are going to have both the markings shown in this picture and the sign. The last picture we looked at was at a runway entrance, and this is what it looks like when you're entering the movement area, so coming from an apron out onto a movement area taxiway. The marking we've talked about, and instead of an airfield type sign at these markings, we include a plain English sign to help just vehicle drivers, people that may not be familiar with aviation, to not enter that area. So look for the markings, look for these warning signs, and that'll help you know where that boundary is. We'll take a look at our movement area map next. What you're looking at here is our airfield diagram showing in red all of the movement areas, and this is for non-AirVenture. We'll look at AirVenture next. So any area in red, you would have to have permission from the control tower to enter and drive around. In fact, anywhere inside this red dashed line, you would need communication with air traffic control. The dashed line highlights the runway safety areas and taxiway safety areas that we have to keep clear when these surfaces are all being used and open. Runway 1836, our primary runway, runs north to south along the AirVenture grounds. Runway 927 runs east to west, closer to 20th Avenue on the north side of the airport. And then what we call locally our diagonal runways are the 2 smaller runways in the center here. Runway 523 and 1331. Our major taxiways on the airport are taxiway Alpha, which runs north to south, basically the full length of the movement area. And it's a heavily used taxiway. Everybody on the south end has to use it to get to the north side and vice versa. Taxiway Bravo runs parallel to runway 927. And then taxiway Papa, which is primarily used during AirVenture, although we do have it open and it's used year-round on the west side of runway 1836. There are other taxiways and taxiway connectors. If you're going to be working out here at AirVenture or at Station 14, it'd definitely be good to take a long look at this map and become familiar with all of the named taxiways. Moving on, the areas in yellow are non-movement areas. So areas aircraft can be, but they don't have to communicate with the tower. Same goes for vehicles. These are the non-movement areas where you would just be giving way to aircraft and not talking to anybody. The green road that goes around the entire airport is our perimeter road. And you guys are welcome to use this. It stays clear of all of the movement areas. So the green perimeter road is a good option if you are trying to get across the airport and it's not an emergency, you don't need to get there fast. The perimeter road is excellent. So here is the airport diagram with movement areas labeled during AirVenture. So our movement area becomes much smaller. The FAA just focuses on the runways, and then EA volunteers and all the procedures that are set up take care of all the other areas for moving and taxiing aircraft around. 927, of course, still a movement area with its runway safety areas off the ends highlighted. And then 1836 with the northernmost 400 feet is actually not movement area. So we'll have cones set up here, and that's what allows aircraft and vehicles like us and you guys to travel across pretty easily without having to make any radio calls getting across. Just follow the flaggers and give way to aircraft. The third runway during AirVenture is the conversion of taxiway alpha into 18 right, or correction, 36 right. And it's a parallel runway to runway 36, so when that happens at airports, we just add left and right from the perspective of the pilot on approach. So this would be 36 left, 36 right. And then if you can imagine flying this way down to these runways, this would be 18 right, 18 left. So the areas in red are the only areas on the airport during AirVenture where permission from the tower needs to be made before you can go out onto the movement area. Next, we'll talk about air traffic control procedures and radio phraseology. Right off the bat, we're going to go through all these frequencies, but for your communications moving around the movement area, talking to our controllers, that'll take place on the radios you guys use every day on the airport channel. The vehicles, the OFD vehicles that are based here at the airport, and a couple of other vehicles you guys have aviation radios, so we'll go through those frequencies. Although you won't normally need to communicate on these, they are nice to know so you can monitor transmissions while you're out here. Some of the aviation radios you have are labeled ground, tower, so it makes it really easy and you don't have to remember these frequencies. Starting out with our normal 51 weeks out of the year frequencies that we use, we've got ground control, tower / CTAF, and Unicom. Ground control is what we use as the county to talk to the tower, and this is what airplanes would use to talk to the tower controllers when they're moving on the ground. So they're not in the air and typically not on a runway when they're talking to ground control. Tower controls aircraft in the air and aircraft that are taking off and landing. And then CTAF stands for Common Traffic Advisory Frequency. It's the same as the tower, but it's essentially what pilots would use at night when the tower is closed to talk to each other and work out any conflicts or who decide who's going to land first. This is kind of an open chat for pilots when the tower is closed. Unicom is typically for pilots. They use it to call the FBO on the radio for requests when they're coming in to land. Maybe they'll request fuel or make sure their rental car is here or something like that. During AirVenture, we do break off some of the frequencies by runway just because of how congested the airspace gets, and so they change slightly here. During normal operations here at the airport, non-AirVenture, our tower is open from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. And then the airport is still open in the middle of the night. Pilots just don't have tower services. They have to talk to each other on the CTAF. During AirVenture, at night we are completely closed, so the CTAF is not something we'll use during AirVenture. And during AirVenture, departures are allowed starting at 6 a.m. And then arrivals and departures, everything can go at 7, and that goes throughout the day, and we close the airport to aircraft at 8 p.m. Here's a look at the phonetic alphabet we use. It's the military version of the alphabet. And then anytime when we're on the radio and we use a call sign or we're identifying a location on the airport we're at, like a taxiway, Bravo 1, for example, we use the phonetics and not just the letter. So good to know. It might sound a little bit different than what you use. The radios that we use in aviation are archaic. They are AM radios, technology designed probably before World War II. So they don't work the same as the radios you're used to. You can step on other people and it garbles transmissions, so you have to be careful of that. But here's a few tips that we teach both pilots and vehicle operators on the airport for using our radios. One, we don't use slang, CB, or police jargon. We take it pretty seriously. Standardized communication helps speed things up and makes communication clear. Prior to transmitting, you should first check to make sure that the correct frequency has been selected on your radio. And then if you have a microphone selector switch in your truck, making sure that's on the appropriate radio. When you go to transmit, make sure you listen to make sure a conversation isn't already going on. Sometimes there might be a few seconds of break between two people talking and you don't want to interrupt that. So wait a few seconds and then call. Again, unlike your radios, our radios, if you try to talk over somebody, basically nobody can hear anything. So it won't kick you off if you try to talk. So it's really up to you to make sure you're not blocking someone else's call. When you go to make a call, this would be kind of the setup or template for an initial call to the ground controller on your airport channel of your radio. So the way we remember this standard template are the 4 W's, who, where. So the first thing you would say on the radio would be who you are calling. And if you're here, it's going to be Oshkosh ground. Who you are. So in your case, it might be Crash 314, whatever your call sign is. Where you are on the airport currently, and where you want to go, and what you'll be doing there. So for example, I want to get from the terminal building where I'm at right now recording this out to runway 1836. Following the 4 W's here, I would say Oshkosh ground, County 12, which is the name of the vehicle I drive. Where I'm on the airport, I'm at the terminal, and I'd like to go to runway 1836 for an inspection. So I covered who I was calling, who I am. I'm at the terminal, and I'd like to go out to 1836 for inspection. Those are the things that air traffic control is expecting to hear from you when you call up. So if you can do these in this order, it makes communication much simpler with them. Next, let's go over some general rules to follow while you're operating on the airport. First rule is more of a question. Is the operation on the movement area absolutely necessary? So when we were talking about the perimeter road earlier, I mentioned how that's a great option if you're not responding to an emergency. So take the perimeter road if you don't absolutely need to be in the movement area. Also, can the operation be delayed until a less busy time? That's something we have to consider all the time here at the airport when we go to do maintenance work. We're looking at how busy the airport is currently. You know, if we know it's a beautiful weather day in the spring, we can expect it to be busy, and we try to delay our work if we can. The speed limits here inside the fence on the airport, 15 miles per hour on non-movement areas. You'll find there are areas on the airport where you'd want to go much slower than that. Always be cautious of blind spots where airplanes might be able to pop out from in between hangars. On the movement areas, our speed limit is 25 miles per hour. All aircraft have the right of way all the time. Pilots know that. That's how it goes on airports. So even if your lights and sirens, you still have to give way to aircraft. They don't have good visibility. They're doing a lot of things to get set up for takeoff, so we just stay out of their way. Listen before you transmit. We talked about that and why that's important, and why using the correct radio technique and phraseology can help speed up and ensure clear communication. Read back ATCT, which stands for Air Traffic Control Tower instructions before proceeding, and read back all hold, short, and runway crossing instructions verbatim. This is an important one. It's actually a requirement that the controllers have. They have to hear you on the radio read back their instructions, and they want to hear especially hold short instructions. So if you're trying to get out to somewhere on the airfield and you're told to hold short of runway 27, they actually want to hear you read that back. We have had incidents at this airport where the read back was not done properly, the controller didn't catch it, and it ended up with a a truck on the runway that wasn't supposed to be there. So always read back hold short instructions. Of course, the controllers are humans and they can make mistakes, so it is advisable to look in all directions before crossing taxiways, runways, or while you're in the movement area. The tower is expecting you to move expeditiously, so if there is any delay while you're trying to get to where you're going, let the controller you're talking to know, just so they know what's up. They do require you to continuously monitor the frequencies while you're in the movement area. So they're expecting you to answer at any time. So if you're in the movement area, make sure that someone is constantly monitoring that frequency. Ensure that you fully understand your instructions from the tower. If you're unsure, please ask for clarifications. We've seen a lot of incidents that just come from confusion on the communication, so just be really clear while you're out there. And we'll talk about this later, but if all else fails, just talk in plain English. Don't let all the phraseology get you tripped up and make you unsafe out there. Last thing on this list is to report when off the movement area. While you're in the movement area, the controllers are tracking you, keeping track of where you're at. They know who all is out there, and so they like report when you get off the movement area so they can cross you off their list of people out there. All right, here's a list of some terms that we use on the radio, and I'm just going to cover some of the ones that can cause confusion or I've seen people say incorrectly. And then I would ask you just to read through the rest and make sure you're familiar with all of these. Yes, if we ever say yes on the radio, we use the word affirmative. Go ahead. This is an important one because it does not mean move your vehicle or move ahead. This would be a request from the tower to you to proceed with your message. Maybe they told you to stand by and they come back to you and say, go ahead. So do not take this as I'm allowed to move my vehicle now. Negative is the word we use for no. Proceed would be the word the verb they would use to tell you to start moving your vehicle. So you are authorized to begin or continue moving with proceed. Roger, a lot of people I've heard confuse this with affirmative. Roger does not mean yes. Roger simply means I heard you, or more officially, I have received all of your last transmission. Stand by, this one's kind of obvious when they say it, but just a little background. The controllers do a lot of coordinating behind the scenes. I assume like your dispatchers do as well, so sometimes they may not be able to answer right away, and they'll just let you know to stand by and they'll get back to you. During an emergency, if they were the ones that called you, they're obviously going to be doing everything they possibly can to get you across the movement area to the scene of the accident or incident. So I wouldn't expect a standby then, but during normal ops, you might hear this. Wilco, this is just kind of a fun one. It just means will comply. You'll hear it every once in a while. It's kind of old school. So take a look at the rest of them, and if you have any questions on these, of course, you can let us know. All right, what if you lose communications while you're out here on the movement area? So before the advent of cell phones, this was a great option the tower had. Still is a great option, but they have a light gun in the tower that can be seen in the middle of the day from anywhere on the airport. It's a beam, so they can point it right at you with some crosshairs and flash some colored lights to indicate what they want you to do. So we'll just go through these real quick. Steady green, if you were to see that, that just means cleared to cross, proceed, or go. Flashing green is cleared for taxi, so not something we would see as a vehicle operator. Steady red means stop right where you're at. Flashing red is clear the taxiway or runway. Flashing white would be return to the starting point on the airport. And then alternating red or green means exercise extreme caution. And that could be they may see something that they don't know you see that looks dangerous. Maybe you're approaching a runway or the conflict with an airplane or something like that. So all that being said, these are good to know, but with cell phones, you can call a lot of people to help you out if you ever lost radio communications while you're out there. Whether that's another fire vehicle that might still have radios, call them on the cell phone, or call the control tower directly up to the cab and talk to the controller on the phone. And if you don't have that phone number for the tower cab, please ask your supervisor to have that. So other options if you lose radio communications, really first you should check your radio, make sure you're on the right frequency, make sure the volume's up, that your mic or speaker selector is on the correct radio, and then go from there. We have had times where our vehicles have lost radios, and the cell phone was the easy solution for that. So back to the first ATC slide here, at least the information that was on it. Let's review what's required on an initial contact to ATC. Who you are calling, who you are, where you are at, and where you want to go, what you do, or what you want to do when you get there. After that initial contact, all the other calls, reading back hold short instructions, additional instructions, everything is just repeated back, and your call sign is added onto that transmission. So every single transmission has crash 314 or whatever you're working in at the end of that transmission. Always read back hold short instructions verbatim. I know I've said it, but that's very important. It is a requirement. The FAA and contract tower controllers have to hear you say that. Report when off the movement area. So a little more explanation on this. If you were out working an incident on runway 927 and the incident was over and you were no longer required and you were going to head back to staging or the station, you would have to do another initial contact because you haven't talked to tower in a while to get yourself out of the movement area. So you would then get instructions from them on what route to take to leave the runway back to wherever you're going. When you finally get off the movement area, back towards the station or your staging area, one more call is what we require just to report that you're finally off the movement area. So not only did you request to get off, you reported when you actually got off. The last bullet there is, again, if all else fails, use plain English. We highlight that because we've trained a lot of people on radios, and every once in a while, someone might get a little overwhelmed with phraseology or phonetics and kind of forget what they're actually requesting. So if that happens to you, just use plain English. Try to throw your call sign in there so they know who's talking. We'd way rather have that and you be safe than create a potential conflict. So the purpose of this slide is to give you an idea of a typical vehicle radio call to our ground controller here at Whitman. We're in the green. I'm County 1 today, so we're in the green, and then the tower ground controller is in blue. So first off, before I even get into this, you can tell I've split my 4 W's into 2 transmissions, and that's all right to do, especially if you have a lot to ask for. So in this case, in this example, I started with Oshkosh Ground County 1 and left it at that. Who I'm calling, who I am. They come back and say who they're calling and who they are. And then the rest of the W's I can come in. And like I've talked about before, we always include the call sign either at the beginning or the end of each transmission. So in this case, it's at the beginning, and then I spill out the rest of the W's. So that's one option for you if you have a lengthy initial contact. All right, so Oshkosh Ground, County 1, they come back, County 1, Oshkosh Ground. County 1 at the terminal apron and Bravo would like to access runway 1836 full length for a runway inspection when available. So we covered our W's, sounds good, and we did them in the order that we talked about. So what I'm expecting next is some sort of route instructions from ATC. So at this point, after I make my transmission, I'm mentally ready, or I've got pen and a piece of paper, or I've got the map in front of me to follow along when I get the instructions. So I'm listening, and ATC comes back and says, County 1, proceed Bravo Alpha, cross runways 27 and 23, hold short of runway 31. So that's a pretty standard call to get to the south side, so that's a good one to know. Going down Alpha, crossing multiple runways, and then holding short of another one. So if it was too much for you, you can ask them to say again. Otherwise, if you got it, all we need to do is repeat it back with our call sign. So I would say County 1 proceeding Bravo to Alpha, crossing runways 27 and 23, hold short of runway 31. If I had missed any of that, especially the runway stuff, I would be asked to read back hold short instructions. In this case, I did. So now I've gotten authorization. I confirm with my signage and my map that I'm in the right location. And then I cross 27 and 23 and hold short of runway 31 just like I was asked to. I get to the hold line of 31. I hold short in front of the red mandatory instruction sign and the double yellow solid, double yellow dashed marking on the pavement, and I wait for ATC to call me back. If I've waited 30 seconds, a minute, and I don't see any airplanes, I might prompt them, but typically they'll be watching you and you'll pull up to that hold short line and they'll give you a call when they're ready for you to cross the next runway. So here we are holding short of 3-1, and the tower controller says County 1, proceed to cross 3-1 to Alpha 1 to runway 18 full length. So I got a runway crossing and then directions to get on to runway 18. I would respond with County 1 proceeding cross 3-1 to Alpha 1 to runway 18 full length. So again, just repeating what they told me with my call sign in there. And you, note that ATC talks a little bit differently. They always will tell you who they are calling typically after the initial contact, where in our case, we're not saying their name, we're saying who we are. So a little confusing, but after you've gotten some time out here in the van driving around, hopefully more of this will make sense. Another resource for you if you'd like to hear or learn more about this is liveatc.net. If you search around there for our airport, you can listen to live radio transmissions, and I would recommend doing that when it's a beautiful day out and light winds, because you'll get a lot of traffic on those radio frequencies online. And that's a free thing too, so a great training resource for the radios here. All right, that's all I have for you today. Thanks for your time. And if you have any questions, of course, work with your supervisors, but we're also a resource here at the airport. So I put our office phone on here, and then names of our management team out here at the airport. So just a reminder that this whole presentation was to keep you safe and to keep other airport users safe out here on the airport. So if you have any questions at all, please feel free to give us a call or stop by the terminal with your questions. So thanks again.